Hello, mon ami.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Ah, the French.
Remember Gambit, the X-Man Gambit?
Yeah.
I was never really into the character, but people seem to really latch on to Gambit. I think he had a look, a style. The notion of charging the cards up and throwing playing cards, that seemed cool. Like they captured weird superhero aesthetic there that people liked.
The idea of a sleight of hand magician superhero is interesting.
Gambit is the reason why, as a kid, I sat in my room throwing playing cards into a hat, trying to be accurate. Gambit is, he was not born in France, but the guy who directed the movie we're discussing today was.
And your name is?
I'm Bob Sham. This is Movie Humpers.
I'm Angela.
This sounds your maybe dogs. We're on our European vacation, and there is a lot of French shit.
Ah, the French.
We've never been to Gay Paris, similar to the people in this movie. Well, the lady hadn't been. Mm-hmm. And we just want to linger for a while. We hope the barge that we're on stops so we can see and traipse through old Gay Paris, and we can have a good time. We try to do classic selections. It's not always the same, but on Mondays, classic selections, which I credit being 1969 and before. Movies from 69 and before I consider classic movies. And this is the oldest movie we're going to discuss for our European vacation theme this month. Yet another French movie. It is by someone who is extremely influential who died way too young. He had a few short films, and then a 60-minute film, and then this one, which became, once restored, his full feature-length film. And this is the last thing he made before he died of tuberculosis the following year in 1935.
Damn.
French New Wave is coming up a lot this month, and this, of course, and it's inspired by a lot of American noir. Noir being the French who dubbed that genre for us. And also this guy, and I think you can see certain aspects where things are grounded in a reality here, but it like flirts with dreams, right? It flirts
and absurdity.
There's a little absurdity, but it flirts with some surrealism, but it is always centered around the humanity. We're talking about the film L'Atalante. It's the final film from 1934, directed by Jean Vigo. His last film, he had tuberculosis. He dealt with it for about 8 years until it finally took his life in 1935. This is written by Jean Vigo, Albert Riera, based on a story by Jean Genet, starring Michel Simon, Dita Parlo, and Jean Dasta. Cinematography by Boris Kaufman. When you're starting to watch movies from a certain time, and you really want to understand the context of the history that you're trying to take in, you start to wonder, like, what did this invent that? Because for 1934, a lot of what we see, and not just like the visual approach, it all felt very unique here. The nature of these two lovers, and how it plays out, and how they come back together. It seems so simple, but it also seems like unlike anything else that we have ever seen when discussing movies from this time. This seems like a timeless love story in some sense, and it's a love story that is far from perfect. Like, these characters have problems. They're a little too much. They are quick to anger. There's issues amongst these people, but they can't help but be drawn to each other even when they're separated. And you might, when he's grabbing his bride, when in a jealous fit, the skipper character, you might be like, wow, she needs to get away from him. She needs to run away. But when they're gone and they're separated, they're in each other's dreams. They are locked together. Regardless of whether this is a love that should or shouldn't be, these people are intertwined.
Which is also why it's so interesting that he just leaves her at one point. It's because he's so hurt by her actions. He feels rejected, so he rejects, but is immediately tortured by it, which is what makes it so beautiful and understandable when they do come back together. So the story is she's never left this tiny small town, and he is the skipper on this barge with 2 other guys.
And
One
they're
guy has a
married.
cat.
They just got married.
They just got married. We see their wedding, and they walk for miles from wherever they got married to the barge.
The town that she's from, and she married a barge shipman who heads up this boat called L'Atalante. And there's this old salty dude that works on there as well, and a young boy.
Mm-hmm.
So when she's marrying not only this man and living and going to live this life on going through the rivers of France, she also is ingrained into this weird family that exists on this barge.
The older guy has cats, and they're everywhere. They have kittens in the married folks' bed at one point.
When we first meet him, were you not worried that the cat was going to fall in the water with him like
Yes,
walking
because
around?
he would just throw them on his back, but then you find out that he has tons of cats.
Yeah, they're just
He
all in
loves
the boat.
them. There are so many cats that walking across the boat, they'll just pick cats up and toss them, which cats are fine. They're going to be fine. It's interesting, though, how much he loves them and how that seems to be the only thing he cares about. And then when, as he calls her, the missus comes, he cares about her too, in a way that made me a little nervous sometimes. I
Really?
wasn't sure his intentions completely because, and this is probably just a cultural thing, because we had the same conversation in The Pickpocket.
Yeah.
They get so fucking close to each other, and I know they're in small quarters, but when you're passing and you kind of stop for a second and it looks like you're taking in a breath of someone's hair, that is not okay.
But like they're on this little ship. There's not a lot of room.
I know, and you know, all 3 of these men are jacking off to her, but
And the way they
it's just kind of gross.
and you can see how constrained and tight everything is, just how the characters, which is an amazing thing to capture during this time, you know, how they're maneuvering and they have to turn sideways. And it is, by our modern sensibilities, we see things that they casually do as creepy, but no one seems to bat an eyelash. I mean, I think there is a cultural difference here. And I think this man, the older salty man, the who's played brilliantly by that character actor.
Isn't his name like Jean-Pierre? Père Jules.
He's actually billed as the lead because he was a more famous character actor of the time.
There's a part where she's having him model a skirt for her so that she can do the hem, because he doesn't really want to go back to work. He wants to hang around her. And when he does get too silly or push the line, she tells him. She's not afraid to stand up to him. So it wasn't that. It was just, are we going to get in a weird position? But you're right, we just don't. I know I
It
tried to
seems
read all
like
kinds of sexual
you're-
things into these
it-
French films.
I kind of just saw it as a bit of a like an uncle guy.
Mhm.
He considers her family.
Some uncles
in
can
a
be
way.
creepy.
Well,
I'm just saying, I felt that too, but
I
I,
know,
still was
but-
like,
Yeah, but that's not what but I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
It seems like you're justifying Jean Dast as Jean, his reaction to coming in, and he's just telling her about all the crazy stuff that he got all over the world, and he comes in and he gets immediately jealous.
that was not understandable unless he was afraid that guy was going to make a pass at her. But then he would have to also believe that his wife would accept it, which she wouldn't have. That part did make me sad because he comes in and he's so mad and he starts destroying this guy's room, which is full of his treasures. He also shares this room with the young boy that is on the boat, and you can tell nothing in that room belongs to him. It's all Père Jules stuff. Père Jules is the one in charge whenever the captain is not there, though. He won't leave the boat if Père Jules is not there.
He has a lot of knowledge.
So she gets on this barge and her family's crying, but she just wants to see the world.
She doesn't just get on the barge, she gets on that pole, and it's just a great little idea, a concept that kind of helps with the whimsy of this whole movie. When you see her on that, I forget what it's called,
But it's like an
the
arm
mast,
coming out of the boat.
and she like rides it onto the barge itself. This movie, especially with all the cats running around and the Père Jules character, like I was imagining it in my head, almost like this, like a Steamboat Willie style old cartoon.
Yes. He
And
felt very cartoony.
It felt like very cartoony. It felt very comical. It's actually quite a funny movie in so many ways. When the man barges in after he's explaining, after Père Jules is explaining to Juliet all the cool stuff he got, Jean comes in and he points to this picture of a naked woman. And he goes, "What is this?" And Père Jules goes, "Oh, that's a picture of me as a boy, as a young boy."
That was amazing.
This movie is actually very funny.
It is very, very funny. The husband is staying up all night working on the boat, and so she is just downstairs in bed alone. So she'll sometimes get up in the night and sit on the deck, and he'll come put her to bed. Or there's one part where she comes and says to him, "Why don't you come to bed?" And Père Jules makes the comment to him of, she needs more than a mattress or something to that effect. Like, the bed is not enough. She needs the man in the bed with her.
Yeah.
They just got married. And I get that he is focused on taking care of his boat and handling his thing, but I don't think anyone thought it through. No one has done laundry on this boat in years.
Well, nowadays we can diagnose people with modern things that we understand. You know, we now know that weird uncle in 1962 was probably autistic, and I think Jean has ADHD. He's hyper focused on being on time, on getting his work done. He gets so hyper focused that he will abandon his plans when he feels like he can get ahead of something. It's not unlike how I edit this show and podcast.
Yeah.
And the stringentness and like the manic behavior. There's something manic about him in wanting to accomplish these tasks. And I think it's not that he genuinely doesn't want his wife to see Paris, because that's all she wants, but it's just that he's just so driven and controlled and single-minded about accomplishing something that he truly believes that it will be okay and we can come back and do it later.
There's that, but there's also the part of him that decides he knows what other people are thinking. He assumes that she's left him when all she did was sneak off the boat to go see the city for a minute. But there had been a guy who was flirting with her, so he just assumes that she left him for this other guy. He's jealous, but he also doesn't even stop for a second to think about why she might be doing the things that she's doing. She's being neglected.
Yes, it's true. When they're outside of Paris and not having going in properly, and Père Jules, and he gets mad when she walks off and he wants to leave immediately.
And does.
And Père Jules is like, "We got 2 days. We can stay here for 2 days." He's just completely butthurt because he sees it as she is conflicting with his single-minded goal of accomplishing this particular task. So now he feels like he has to compensate in some manic way. I told a mutual friend of ours the story of us moving to Nashville and that night in which I had this box truck and I was going back and forth all night, and then a bunch of shit. Well, I basically was telling the story to explain what a manic mess I was that night. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I can't condone a lot of the physicality of Jean, but I understand his flaws and why he feels the way he does and why he gets way ahead of himself. But I think Jean also has genuine regret as well.
I agree. I also can understand all of that. The thing that I'm not sure about, does he leave her because he really thinks that she ran off with this guy and is cheating on him? Or is he so controlling that he doesn't want her to do anything without him, and the second that she does, because he doesn't want her to leave the boat without him?
Well, and you're talking about this guy who's coming up and he's like, you know, he's a bit of a clown.
They go on one date.
He's a bit of a clown, and he's trying to present to them
he asks
wares,
her to dance.
And he is flirty with her, and he does. But ultimately, while she doesn't take him serious, she's charmed by him, but doesn't take him seriously. She ultimately does not cheat on Jean, even after Jean has abandoned her.
But even in that scene, the guy pulls her through this sort of window onto the dance floor from their table. This is the one date we ever see them go on. And he pulls her out. She's dancing with this guy, but she's looking over her shoulder at her husband, who instead of coming and like sweeping her and dancing with her is brooding at their table until he comes over and is angry. And it's like, just fucking be like, nah. Go around and dance with your beautiful wife.
Right.
Just, why are you pouting and then gonna approach someone as though you're gonna have a fight? It was just dumb. And yeah, that guy was still flirting, and that guy was like, I'll show you, Perry. Well, he's a player. He's trying to do what he can do. He's a con man. He's trying to sell shit on the side. He gets kicked out of the restaurant. But
we all understand
his behavior.
The jealousy is understandable. It's easy to sit and separate and look at that and be like, why didn't he do this? Why didn't he do that? Well, he's
now, she should have also left a note.
Yeah, maybe bargemen aren't so adept at processing their emotions, for sure.
Maybe that's why they're on the barge, because they don't have to deal with the people. But he sold her a life of, we're going to go everywhere and see everything.
We're gonna travel.
And she said to him early on, well, how long do you stay in a port? And he says, as long as it takes to unload. He's not trying to go out into the city.
Yeah. It's like it's like saying you went to a town when you just were on an airport layover.
She's also super fucking cute. And this is an older movie, so it always shocks me when you see like hard nipples and stuff.
Yeah.
But she's like sexy and walking around this boat, and she only wants him.
Well, Pear Jules has been all over the world, and she lives vicariously through him. And you read that scene so weird, because I thought it was so charming, because she resents his presence immediately when she gets on the barge, because she's like, okay, I want to do the linens, and this old man's complaining all the time. And when they're in that room and talking about his adventures, she's living vicariously through him, and he understands the connection that she wants and that they make. And I actually felt like it was a beautiful thing, the way that they actually found a way to like each other, because they absolutely did not when she first got on that boat.
And I can see it for what it was. There was this part of me that felt anxious in that scene, because I was worried it was going to go some other kind of way. Because they were playing him up kind of cartoonish. He was a little childlike, and yet has pictures of naked ladies all over the place. And I was just worried there was going to be something weird. There wasn't. And the fact that there wasn't,
right,
made me love it more.
Right. But it just seemed that worry seemed to matter a lot to you, because you're talking about it now.
Well, I'm just trying to analyze my view of these French films. And like I said, I think it's just a cultural difference where I am not used to someone being in my space unless they are invited.
Because you're not so turned off by the clownish guy pulling her through, and he's got his hands all over her.
But they're in a room, a bunch of people are around, and it feels like somehow safer than in a cramped space.
Am I doing the meme where the handsome? Am I accidentally stumbling into some kind of dude shit? You know that meme where it's got like fat guy comes and talks to girl in office, and she's like, "Oh my god, HR." Handsome guy comes in, and she's like, "Oh, are we doing that right now?"
I mean, I
You know
don't
what I'm
think
talking
so.
about?
I do know what you're talking about, but I think if that other guy had also gotten onto the
But
barge
again,
and was alone with her in her room, I would have thought the same thing.
I think that meme only applies if you think that Pear Jules is trying to get with her, and that's not the case. I was worried that I actually stumbled into a nice guy's. So they get separated, and it's not clear how long they're gone. It could be like weeks, right?
She rents a room.
Yeah,
and she's looking for a job.
She seems to have figured out some means to survive in Paris, but she's not with a man. She doesn't run off with a man. She's by herself most of the time when we see her.
Her purse gets stolen by a pickpocket.
Which prevents her from going to the next town where she knows the barge will go to. She could take the train. Hinders her because she does know to go to a certain place to meet up with him. And yeah, it gets looted. It seems like Jean is the most torn over it. And it looks like Juliette is just, like, matter of fact, just making your way. I mean,
she doesn't really have a choice.
She also has she's also a small town girl who never left that town. And she has the great city of Paris, the city of lights, to at least distract from a lot of heartache. But old Jean just has himself and his salty buddies and crew, right?
She does have the distraction of the city, but there are multiple times in her montage of living and looking for things in Paris where
she's checking
men
the
are
barges.
creeping on her.
Oh, yeah.
No, yeah, or she seems that way.
There is
like
a man that
someone will
walks
stand
up and like
she's like, and she'll turn or she'll walk towards people, like, or she'll look weird. There is that aspect.
That's
of
true.
It.
It does show a second of her, like, that she could be a target here alone in
Exactly,
this big city.
which reinforced even more the sweetness of the scene with
Well, yeah,
Pear Jules.
John and her, they have a dream that seems to overlap. They seem to have the same dream, and it's not explicitly showing up, but you can interpret this as a masturbation scene.
Oh, yeah.
And they're laying in bed writhing.
She, like, starts to stick her hand in her
Yeah.
shirt at one point. It pulls away, but they are both having wet dreams.
I mean, it's something to see in a movie from 1934.
Yeah.
And the way Jean Vigo accomplishes the effects, and like they have her swimming, and then it's layered over with Jean like dreaming and struggling because he wants to be with her so bad, but she's dreaming the same dream in tandem with each other. They're apart, and he's a victim of his own hubris that has separated him from his wife for no good reason. And she could maybe feel justified in being like, this is a wash. You know, I can move on. But no, through their dreams, their hearts are still bound to each other. And even, and that's is why she still checks the barges and stuff, and why he's looking, and he's so depressed as hell. But Pear Jules, he goes out, and maybe with some bit of cosmic coincidence, he manages to find her at a place where this hit song about working on a barge, these workman songs, which were actually very popular at the time in France.
And didn't Pear Jules basically say to him, we're going back to Paris, and I'm going to go find her
I'll
because
find
I
her
can't
for
stand
you.
you like this.
Yeah, and he does, and he hears a song that he had sung for her earlier in the movie, and Pear Jules is the one that picks her up in his arms.
Throws her over his shoulder.
Again, in a totally familial way, I interpreted.
Yes.
And he takes her down to the barge, and then Jean and Juliet are reunited, and you really do feel the bond, the chemistry, the love between them. Even as foolish as people may have acted, Jean in particular, the movie convinces you that they are meant to be together, they are bound together, and it proves it by separating them, and then they still come together.
I also loved that there was no talking when they came together. They stood and looked at each other, and they both hesitated for 1 second just to say, like, are we, what's happening? And then immediately they embrace, and they fall on the floor, like, kissing each other.
Pear Jules has this phonograph that he wants to keep getting to work, and at one point he's moving his finger across the record, and you hear music, and he thinks he's doing the music, but then you look up and the cabin boy is playing the accordion while he moves his finger. That's when
it feels the most like a cartoon.
It's a little different, but it reminded me in Le Deleuze, a movie that is definitely running off of inspiration from this movie, where Jean-Paul Belmondo's character goes in and he's roughing up this woman, and dramatic music surges, and then he turns off a radio and the music stops in the scene. Like that little touch, that whimsical touch, it's like a dream, but it makes that, it moves like a dream. This whole thing does, but it's still centered. You know, it's still centered. It just flows. I don't mean that as a pun, because most of it takes place on a barge, but it flows so nice. Mm-hmm. And it's a beautiful little love story. I actually really like this a lot. I'm going to give it 1 through 5 each, combined for best out of 10. What do you give L'Atalante by the late Jean Vigo?
I think I'm going to give it a 4.25.
I'm going to go a 4.5. So that is a
8.75.
Yes. Here you go, L'Atalante by Jean Vigo. It rests between the documentary Into the Abyss by Werner Herzog and Mike Figgis's Leaving Las Vegas, another interesting love story. It's at least as good as those movies, if not better. If we ever get a boat, we know what we're going to name it.
L'Atalante.
So check the show notes for links to other places to find us. We're still sticking it into Europe all month long, and we got some Frenchies still to go, including one that is considered the ultimate French New Wave movie, which we will be discussing Wednesday. So come back to that. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. Let me know what you think about Jean Vigo. If you recommend any other Jean Vigo, you're essentially recommending like 2 short films and another hour-long film. And based on watching this, I would absolutely love to watch them.
Yes.
And yes, a man who left too early. He surely would have had a very prolific body of work had he lived a full life.
Au revoir.
Les jeunes filles se sont embarquées sur le péniche pour bien longtemps. Leurs jours commencent.